Well, if you read page 7 of the advertiser today, you'd already be familiar with our keynote speaker today. She is a Blackhawk helicopter pilot. She's been a member of the Counter Terrorism Regiment. She's served in East Timor and Afghanistan as part of her 22-year career in the Australian Defence Force. She's now a firefighter, a mother of 2, and she flies Blackhawk firebombers for a private company, but it hasn't all been smooth sailing, or smooth flying, we should say, in this particular case. At one point, she earned herself the nickname Broken Rotor, which isn't the nickname that you want when you are flying for Army aviation, but I'll let her explain that. Would you please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker for today, Genevieve Rueger.
Thank you very much for your warm welcome. My name's Genevieve Rueger, and I've been invited kindly here today to tell you about some of the challenges that I've faced in my life and career to date. Upon reflection, it seems I've got quite the material to fit into 15 minutes, but I'll do my best. I'm going to take you back to 4-year-old me, early 80s, and I'm doing what any other 4-year-old would be doing, maybe painting on a wall or chewing on a bit of Play-Doh or something, and then I hear the noise that triggers me to race upstairs to our second story, straight out onto the deck, and pin my little chubby cheeks to the balustrade and wait until I can see it. And then there it is. It's the Westpac rescue helicopter coming on in. I grew up in the Adelaide Hills in Bel Air, and our house is very close to the quarries. And occasionally, the helicopter would need to come and rescue someone from those quarries. The thing that captivated me the most was the helicopter approaching and it hovering. Because as a young child, that blew my mind. And I would wait there willing it to move, and it never would. And I'd watch them send someone down the line. Hopefully 2 people came back up to that line, and then the magic was broken, and it would turn around and depart to the closest hospital. I then fast forward you to about 9 or so years, and I'm 13, and I'm fortunate enough to be a student at Seymour College. On this day, I hear some super exciting news. The Westpac rescue helicopter is making a planned visit to our school. So we're all out there on the oval, about 200 odd students, and we're waiting, and then I hear that same noise. It's the blades slapping the air, beating that air into submission. And I am instantly excited. In fact, I've got to be honest with you, I've got goosebumps now thinking about it, because I watched as this visual spectacular launched over the trees surrounding our oval, and the wind rush coming down and landing right in front of me. I happened to be standing next to my favourite teacher at school at the time, and her name's Miss Rosie Lake, and she's sitting right here today. And I said to Rosie, Miss Lake, I want to do that one day. That's awesome. And she could have very easily have gone into that train of thought, which I think was quite common still in the early 90s, that's a very strange thing for a 13-year-old girl at Seymour College to want to do. But she didn't. Rosie is a spectacular person. She was she won't know this, but she was my shining light at school. She grabbed that thought of mine and ran with it. And on the 5 years that I spent at that high school, it's a bit of a roller coaster ride. I don't know, maybe that was just me through my teenage years, but it felt like it. And every now and then I'd have a conversation with Rosie, and Rosie would say, remember that helicopter? Where were you at with that? Wasn't that amazing? And she would prompt me, which led me to look into aviation. And when I stumbled upon Army aviation and helicopters, I couldn't unsee it. You mean I get to work with a team, I get to test myself physically and mentally. I get to serve the country. I get to serve a community overseas, maybe. I get to have this massive adventure all wrapped around this thing that I think I'd like to do, this flying thing, especially in helicopters. Yes, please. So I start looking in that direction. And I want to make note here of another interaction I had with a teacher at the time. We were in a class talking about war and how revolting war is and how destructive it is on people's lives and what is the purpose. And this teacher turns a limelight on me. And despite being up on the stage today, I'm more of an under the radar kind of a person. And she says, hang on a minute, I know you want to join this. You want to join the Defence Force. Why do you want to be part of this? Why do you want to be part of something so destructive? And I was so mortified at the thought that someone could think that that's what I want to be part of, as opposed to the opposite, and serving people and helping, that I ashamedly, my answer was, I don't know. And I went home, and my brothers picked up that there was something going on. And if anyone wants to have a brother off, feel free, but you're going to lose because I got the best brothers in the world. And they said, well, okay, we get that you're upset, but why do you want to do this? Tell us why. And in that comfortable space with people who care about me, I was able to tease out these things. And those things were exactly those 5 things I mentioned before. And it's all about having the purpose, really, to serve, wrapped around something that I really desired, which was flying. So I can thank you, Rosie, also this other teacher, and my family for having a successful application to the Defence Force all those years ago. Now, I joined the Defence Force through the Australian Defence Force Academy, ADFA, you might have heard of it, it's over in Canberra. I spent 3 years there, starting at 17, going through training, basic training, and getting a degree. I then spent 12 long months at the Royal Military College, Duntroon. Came out the end of that as an officer. I went on pilot's course. I was allocated Blackhawk helicopters. And then I was also allocated the Counter Terrorism Squadron in Holsworthy, Sydney. Easy done, right? It's just like that. It's simple. That is far from the truth, and that's what I'm here to talk to you and share with you today, because I'm missing out a massive, very important chunk of that story. And I think if you scratched beneath the surface of a few people's stories that might be similar, you'll find out perhaps a similar version. And I'm here to talk to you today about the F word. And if we learn to embrace the F word more, and we learn to talk about it and normalise the talking about it, I think we're going to get somewhere. And you might find that if you've been down a particular pathway that is blocked, something that you really wanted to do, if you embrace this, you may be able to move through that block. And the F word I'm talking about today is failure. So I rock up on pilot's course, and 21 years old from memory, and I've got my cool boots on and my flying suit and blue beret, and sadly I had aviator sunnies, which is an embarrassing part. And I'm pretty much maverick, and I'm blissfully unaware about how hard this is about to get instantly. And I was behind the 8 ball at the start. A third of the way through your pilot's course, the fixed wing side of things, you have a flying progression test. It's an hour and a half. You pass it, you move on to the next phase. You fail it, then you are removed from course and you must find a new job within Defence. I went from hero to zero in 1.5 hours. I failed my flying progression test royally. Within hours, I was called back into the boss's office, and he goes, "Rightio, where are we sending you? Where do you want to go?" And for the second poignant time in my life, I croaked out, and I don't know, maybe somewhere aviation. I knew nothing else. That's all I wanted to do. So within days, I was shipped off with all my gear up to a 162nd Reconnaissance Squadron in Townsville. Now I'm going to pause here to try and tell you how I felt at the time. I had failed myself. I had failed my family. I wouldn't talk to them. I had failed my course mates. I'd failed my friends back home. I wouldn't talk to any of them either. I'd failed the Defence Force. Look how much time and money they'd put into me. When I looked in the mirror, all I saw was a miserable failure. So I rock up in Townsville at the squadron and I go and introduce myself to the boss. I'm the only female out of 130 people. I'm also the only non-flying aviation officer. So I don't know if you can see me, but this is about how big I felt at the time. I introduced myself to the boss and he goes, "Put your bags down, we're going for a fly." And I'm like, can this get any more humiliating? Probably not. And we get out to the aircraft and I said, "Sir, stop. Do you know that I'm not a pilot? I can't fly this." And he's like, "What sort of boss do you think I am? Of course I know that. Just get in, we're going for a fly. You still like flying, right?" And I said, "I don't know. Maybe I do, maybe I don't." Every time you go for a fly in a military helicopter, you have to go and get an authorisation brief. You go and see the boss or a delegate, and they say, "Yes, I agree with what you're going to do," and you can go flying. Every time my boss got one of the pilots coming along and there was a spare front seat in one of those small helicopters, he would say, "Yes, you can go flying. Go ask Jen if she's free." I did a lot of flying at that squadron because I made the time for it. And on the very last day of my boss's posting at that unit, my sergeant runs into my office and he's like, "Man, you have to go and see the OC and you've got to take your hat." Now, have I got any ex-military brothers and sisters in this room? Can you put your hand up? Yeah. So what does it mean if you've got to take your hat to the boss's office? Good or bad? It's really bad, usually. So I go there with my beret and I'm ready to have my ears pinned back about goodness knows what I've done. And he says, "You will reapply for pilot's course." My military brother there was, that sounds like an order, right? So I did. An absolutely grueling interview process for me to get back on that course. But I made it through and I was able to rejoin pilot's course from the scratch. I had a very different outlook on life. Thank you. I had a very different mindset this time. I had 4 rules. At least 8 hours of sleep every night, no matter what. At 10 o'clock, books closed, I go to bed. At least 2 exercise sessions a day. And this is super important because for me, this gave me space between myself and the extremely challenging and stressful thing that I was embarking on. No alcohol, that was a no-brainer, and no relationships. Nothing was going to get in my way to what I want to achieve this time. Now, I'm laying a lot of my cards, in fact, all of my cards on the table today, and I will be very honest with you, and I did break one of those rules, but I married that guy, and we have 2 kids, so I'm okay with that now. As a result of that determination, and as a result of that massive roller coaster ride I'd been on, I can tell you now that the rest is true. So I graduated from pilot's course. I came second on my course, which blew my mind. And And I graduated onto the Blackhawk helicopter, which also blew my mind. It's a massive technical aircraft. I didn't think that was ever going to be for me. And I ended up at the Counter Terrorism Squadron in Sydney, flying Blackhawks for the SAS and the Commandos. Now, as a result, I can show you some photographs of, hopefully this will get us there, through pilot's course, and then at my squadron. We did a lot of work with ships underway, stationary ships. We usually flew in a packet in formation. We worked the counter-terrorism role in ships around capital cities, and we would go and familiarise ourselves with capital cities around Australia. I was also fortunate enough, within 2 weeks of becoming a helicopter pilot, to deploy overseas on operations to East Timor. Part of my heart remains in East Timor because of these young children. And my hope is, and my purpose is to serve, and my hope is that it improve their lives somehow. I also deployed to Afghanistan, working with the unmanned aerial vehicles, also known as drones. Part of my heart also remains in Afghanistan because I met some absolutely beautiful people over there, and their lives are controlled and governed and ruined by a small faction of people. And it makes me sad still, thinking about it. But with my sense of purpose of serving, I hope that some things that we did over there have improved their lives, even if it was for a short period of time. This photo is really important to me, and you can't see it, and I didn't know it at this time. So I am sitting on the front left-hand seat there, and that was my last flight in an Australian military Blackhawk. We had just been up in Kultana, up north of Adelaide a little way, doing an exercise helping to prepare the SAS for a deployment over to Afghanistan. And I'd flown about 40 hours. It was a lot of hours in 2 weeks. It was very intense, very stressful. The reason why it was my last flight was because I was pregnant with my now 12-year-old. If Kaylee ever thinks about going into aviation, I'm going to argue that she gets 40 unofficial flying hours logged in her book before she even starts. So I then moved, I've come into this extremely stressful, dynamic world where we're away for, on average, 9 months of every single year, and my husband's doing the same job, to all of a sudden having a child. And I became that person at home, like all the other partners at the squadron, who I, then took my hat off because I realised how difficult this was. And Kaylee was a crier, and I'm on my own for 9 months of her first year. And to think that I thought I'd done some hard things, this is the hardest thing that I'd ever come across. And doing it on my own, and if there's anyone in this room that has raised a child on their own, I take my hat off to you, because it is the most difficult thing I've ever done. But it wasn't working. So we got towards the end of that first year, and Mike and I agreed something's got to change. So we did make a change. We requested a posting, and we were posted to southwestern Queensland, working out of the Aviation Training Centre in Oakey. Now, things were starting to come together a little bit better. We had more time with the family, and family was and is my priority number one. But I exist for other reasons as well, and that is people. I was working with really great people. The purpose of my job was good. I was fulfilling a purpose. I was helping training baby pilots. But the family thing wasn't quite right, because we had zero extended family. So towards the end of that year, and we welcomed our second child, Lockie, into the world, I said, things have got to change again. We can't do this. We can't now do this on our own. So we requested another posting, and we were posted finally back to Adelaide. And this was a real key posting, because in terms of flying, in terms of just flying, it was a career killer. because there was no helicopters here, military helicopters that we could fly here. But it fulfilled that family role. My children have extended family to grow up with, and that was my primary concern. The other things weren't really being addressed as well. So people are my big thing as well. I was working with great people, but purpose. I could only do at the rank of major and being an aviation officer here in Adelaide, there was only 3 jobs that I could ever do here in Adelaide. And none of those jobs served my purpose, which was to serve. They were very different jobs, mostly desk-bound. And so I didn't feel that was quite working. That purpose wasn't there for me. So again, I thought this needs to change. And at the time, and this was just a pure coincidence, a friend happened to call me, and I used to fly with him, and he's a firefighter in the Metropolitan Fire Service. And for an hour and a half, I listened to him. I didn't say a word. I listened to him tell me about how good it was to be a firefighter in the Metropolitan Fire Service. And everything he was saying, I was mentally ticking off. I'm like, this sounds amazing. You mean I get to work as a team, I get to test myself physically and mentally, I get to serve a community, and I get to have this whole big adventure. Now, there's no flying, but I get to have this whole big adventure and tick off all those other things that give me purpose. Yes, please. So I pursued that avenue and successfully was recruited into, and I am now a firefighter with the Metropolitan Fire Service. I talk about people and purpose. I work with brilliant people. My purpose is to serve a community. That gets a big tick in that role as well. But there's always been this little niggle of the flying thing for me. And I did do a little bit of flying with a local South Australian-owned business, Aerotech. And at the end of, we have some Aerotech people here today, and at the end of last year, I got a phone call from the chief pilot, and he says, "Hey Jen, we've got a pilot position that's vacant. It's flying the Blackhawk, and it's an aerial firebombing role. Are you in?" And I'm like, oh wow. Now, you'll be happy to know that I didn't answer that question this time with an I don't know. But I did actually say, give me 5. And I called home. And my daughter answers the phone, and she's 12. And I'm trying to get onto Mike, but he's on the roof or in the roof or something. He's always doing something with the roof. And Kaylee says, Kaylee, here's what I had to say. And she says, you have to say yes. Now that sounds like another order. So I had to say yes. And so now I get to, in the summertime, I'm working for this wonderful company, Aerotech, and they've come here as supporters today, which is incredible. And it's ticking off on all these things I've been talking about. I get to work with great people. The company genuinely is concerned about their employees' welfare. They're professionals, and they exist to serve a purpose and serve a community. That's in the summer, and for the rest of the year, I get to work with the Metropolitan Fire Service, which ticks off all those other things. So in terms of, and I get to prioritise in all of this, I can prioritise my children. So right now, I've reached this point of equilibrium, and I'm in my happy place. I have one last thing to share with you. I have a couple of photos, in fact, before I share that one last thing. Metropolitan Fire Service, and I was able to sneak this photo in. This happened yesterday. Got to show my son the role of flying.
A former scholar has dropped in on her old school during a whistle-stop tour, making good on a promise made a decade ago. Now a pilot with the Defence Force, she parked her Blackhawk helicopter on the Seymour College Oval as part of an army recruitment drive. 10 years ago, as a student of Seymour, she warned she'd return one day as a fully fledged pilot, but her identity has to remain a secret.
That was a very emotional day for me. And when I finally was able to land the helicopter with all these young women in front of me, I put my, I shut the engines down, I got out of the aircraft and put my feet on the ground. No sooner had I done that, and I was wrapped up in this massive embrace. And that was Rosie. I got to share 2 very significant days in my life with someone who was a beacon for me in my teenage years. So thank you, Rosie. That day completed a circle for me. The Westpac Rescue helicopter pilot has no idea who I am, and I have no idea who that person was that landed on my school oval when I was 13. Maybe I'll find that out. But what that person did, unknowingly perhaps, was give me a gift of hope and inspiration. My purpose, if I can get that last photograph up on the screen, my purpose for landing that day was the hope that one of these young women in that crowd would take that gift of hope or inspiration as a pay-it-forward moment and run with it. And if that was the case, and that is the case, then my purpose was fulfilled. Thank you very much.